Hello, everyone. My name is Curry Stegan, and I am the host of the Passion for the Paranormal podcast show. Thank you for tuning into the show on my YouTube channel, and please make sure you hit that subscribe button so you can check out other great content that's going to be coming down the road.
The opinions and views expressed by the guests of Passion for the Paranormal are not always the views and opinions expressed by the host.
Well, hello once again, and welcome to Passion for the Paranormal, bringing a passion for the paranormal to you. I'm your host, Curry Stegan, and it's so great to be back with you again. I'm having a blast doing the show, and I really hope you're enjoying tuning in. I've had some great guests on the show, and got just another great guest joining me tonight. His name is Nomar Slevik, and Nomar is a ufologist and UFO researcher and author. He's authored 2 books on the subject of UFOs and abduction cases, primarily in the state of Maine, which is his home state, and a few other cases outside of Maine in Northeastern United States. It's going to be great to hear his thoughts into the research he's done on those cases. The other thing I wanted to share is there was a national poll out there and there were several paranormal topics within that poll, and a couple of them were, the first one was, do you believe in ghosts? And this was, a nationwide poll that was done, and the way that came out was over 60% of Americans said they do believe in ghosts. And that's kind of high. The second question was, how many Americans believe aliens are visiting us? And that one came out over 40% indicated that they believe aliens are visiting us. So a couple of interesting questions. There were some other questions in that poll, paranormal related. But these two were 2 that I thought would be fun to do a Facebook poll on, do my own little Facebook poll. And so the first question that I did, I wanted to share the results of my Facebook poll. And the first question was, do you believe in ghosts? And 111 of 125 people responded or voted saying yes, they believe in ghosts. So that's 89%. And I do realize some of these people that voted are followers of the Facebook page and are already believers. So, of course, the numbers are going to be a little high, but still 89% is a little higher than I thought it would have been. And then on the second question I asked was, do you believe aliens are visiting us? And 109 of 160 people voted on that question. So 68% indicated that they believe aliens are visiting us. A little bit higher than I thought it would have been. So that was interesting the way those numbers came out. I'm doing a couple of more polls, and I will share the numbers on those other polls in the next show. So without further ado, I do want to get into the interview with Nomar, but before I forget to mention it, if you could please head over to the Facebook page at facebook.com/passion, the number 4, the paranormal, and please like the page there. You can even offer a review on the page. If you're an iTunes app user and you're tuning into the show on iTunes, I would just ask that you please spend a minute and do a review of the show there. And make sure you subscribe. That's really going to help me to help others find the show and help me to continue to push the show forward. So please help me do that. You can also tune into the show on Google Play. Google Play, you can subscribe to the show. I don't think you can offer a review or rating there. But anyways, I'm going to go ahead and get into the interview with Nomar, and I really hope you enjoy tonight's discussion. Okay, so my guest tonight is Nomar Slevik, and Nomar is a ufologist and paranormal researcher and author of the books UFOs over Maine, Close Encounters from the Pine Tree State, and his most recent 2018 book, Otherworldly Encounters, Evidence of UFO Encounters and Abductions. Nomar, thanks so much for joining me on the show.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, it's great to have you on the show. I'm really looking forward to having this discussion about some of the research you've done into the UFO cases there in the Northeast. But before we do kind of get into the specifics on the UFO cases you've researched, can you take us back and kind of recount, how you got involved in this crazy paranormal stuff and into researching and writing about UFO cases?
Yeah, it really all started back when I was a kid, so probably 35, 36 years ago. I was 4 or 5 years old, and I had a sighting in Fort Kent. And Fort Kent is at the tip of Maine. You can literally throw a rock and hit Canada. And it was a late winter, and I was sound asleep, and a loud clap of thunder woke me up, and I could hear tapping of rain hitting the windows. And then I saw some flashes of light, and I was like, oh, a thunder and lightning storm. So I sat up in bed and watched the storm through my bedroom window. And then, after a moment or so, there was a really thick lightning bolt, and it penetrated a cloud. I mean, at least that's what I thought anyway. And the type of lightning bolt, if I asked you to draw one, you'd probably draw this thick, jagged yellow line, or maybe think of the charging indicator on your smartphone. That's what it looked like to me. And it was crazy because even then I knew, at that age, I knew you could only see lightning for a very little amount of time, less than a second. But I kept watching it, and there was electrical arcs, coming off of it, and I kept hearing booms. And then eventually I just drifted back off to sleep. Well, I woke up in the morning, I went to the bathroom, and when I was walking back to my room, you can see out my bedroom windows from the hallway, and the lightning bolt was still there, stuck in the cloud. So I thought that was crazy, and I ran downstairs to get my dad, and I brought him up to show him. And when I did, it was gone. So I tried explaining to him what it was, and he kind of did what adults do, which is yeah, ruffled my hair a little bit. And he proceeded to tell me that it did not rain the night before. And that actually kind of scared me, because at that point, I didn't know what to think. Of course I wasn't thinking UFO at the time. I just knew something pretty weird happened. And then about 2 weeks later, I was also witness to the Northern Lights. And it was gorgeous and strange. And those two happenings taught me at a very young age that the world is just mysterious and fantastic, And I was kind of hooked then. But again, I was still scared. But that's kind of the origins of it all. That was the catalyst that got me into it all.
Yeah, that's amazing that you can actually recount something that happened at that age, too. It had to have been pretty significant for you to actually be able to remember something like that at that age. That's amazing. Let's talk a little bit about... I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm just saying, I agree. It must have been significant enough that it stayed with me, and I can see that lightning bolt like it was yesterday. And that's what it looked like. It was certainly a UFO, meaning unidentified flying object. Was it extraterrestrial? I don't know, but I certainly saw a UFO at that age.
Wow, yeah, and some people go their whole lives and never see that. So I guess maybe I envy you in that respect, because I think you talked a little bit in another interview that you've had some other experiences as well with seeing or witnessing UFOs, and that's
I've seen quite a few things. We can probably get into some of those too, but anyway.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about, because you've done a lot of research for the 2 books. Can you talk about roughly how many UFO cases you've researched and how many witnesses you've talked to?
Oh, jeepers. For the cases I've researched, you're talking everything from the littlest, tiniest report that says, light in the sky observed for 10 seconds, all the way to, pages and pages of stuff. Per encounter. So in regards to encounters, thousands of cases. In regards to how many witnesses I talked to, I would say hundreds, but low hundreds,
Okay. And now, the ones that you included in the books were, I'm assuming these were the most significant, and the ones that were probably the most, I don't know if I should say believable, but they were probably the most well documented. Is that kind of the cases that you included in the book, or the books?
Sort of. I mean, I would pretty much agree with that. And just to touch on what you said a little bit about, the believability of them, some of them are really hard to believe. And I'll give you a gauge on why or how I include stuff in my writings. Because I even write up stories that don't go in the books,
Right.
Some of them fall onto the editing room floor, if you will. But essentially, there's like three areas. And the first area is like 10% of the people that I talk to, I just downright don't believe. I thank them for their time. I'm not rude, but I 100% think they're lying. And the motivation for the lying, I don't know, but it bothers me, and I just go about my business. The second set of people, which is much larger, you're talking 70-80% of the people I talk to, I believe that they believe it. And that's pretty significant. And when I get to talk to these people in person, that's when I can really get to gauge the genuineness. Again, I'm no expert. I'm just a guy that likes talking to witnesses. But when you talk to somebody, you can see the look in their eye, you can hear the tone of their voice, you can see their body language, and a large percentage, again, I believe that they believe it. And when you're talking to a cop or you're talking to an elderly woman who's never shared this story before, things like that, it really makes it much harder to not believe. And then the last group, which is also a small group, I'd say another 10% or so, I don't know what to think. And I probably think that it's extraterrestrial or something paranormal related,
Right.
But again, those are rare, and but those are like the three categories. So pretty much if you fall into the 80% and most certainly the 10% on the believability scale, that's why I'm going to include it in the book. Now, within that 70 to 80% of people where I believe that they believe it, those cases are chosen, again, for publication in the vein of, like you were saying, it's very well documented. Hopefully I had a chance to talk to them, all that good stuff. So documentation and detail is a pretty big reason on why I would have chosen the story.
Right. The cases that you've examined, because I haven't read the books, the cases that you've examined, were they pretty much all within, for both books, within the state of Maine, or did some of them kind of fall out of there in the greater Northeast area?
Some of them did fall out for maybe subsequent encounters, but the heart of the encounter that I'm focusing on did derive from the state of Maine. Okay.
And were you able to kind of find some, the ones that you've examined and you've documented, have some of these in clusters in certain regions? Have you found that some of these cases kind of happen in certain areas and clusters?
Yeah, there have been some clusters. And there's one cluster in particular where I coined the term in the book, the Somerset Triangle. Now, really, it's not so much a triangle, but I use that term as it has a familiarity for paranormal hotspots, if you will. And I guess I also simply just like the term better.
Right.
But the Somerset Triangle is about a 200 square mile area in Maine that includes Somerset County and also Franklin County. But the majority of the sightings were in Somerset County, so I settled on the Somerset Triangle. But just in those areas alone, there were hundreds of reported encounters. And when I've spoken to other researchers, such as, MUFON state directors, Peter Davenport at Newfork, when I've talked to them, so many encounters go unreported that you can kind of do like a 1 for 10. For every one reported sighting, there's probably 10 that go unreported. Again, these are just anecdotal numbers, but, if we're to go on a scale like that, based on the hundreds of encounters that have been actually reported, you might be looking upwards of 800 or 1,000 cases just in that 200 square mile area. We are talking a pretty lengthy time span, though. We're talking 50s to present day, but yeah.
Right, and now is this, you said a lot of paranormal reports. I mean, so does this go beyond the UFO reports into other types of paranormal phenomena?
Yeah, some of it does. The majority of it is certainly extraterrestrial in nature, meaning, lights in the sky are being seen, or maybe alien beings are being confronted. There's also crop circle reports and Men in Black reports. But also in the area, though, there have been Sasquatch reports and dogman sightings and things like that. So it seems to be a high strangeness area as opposed to extraterrestrial only.
Right, yeah, and that's kind of what I was getting at. That's interesting because I had Stan Gordon on the show last month, and I don't know if you're familiar with Chestnut Ridge area.
Absolutely, I absolutely love the work that Stan Gordon does.
Yeah, and he was talking about how there's been so many different types of, whether it be cryptids or UFO sightings, and then, the reports of UFOs being sighted, very large structured craft, and then people seeing Bigfoot sightings. And of course, he's going to say that doesn't mean he's saying Bigfoot's riding around in UFOs. But it does, make people start to question, hey, maybe this stuff could be related in some shape, form, or fashion.
Right, and is it related in the sense of, like, the umbrella of paranormal is all happens for one connected reason? Like, it could be that general, if you will, or it could be more specific, are, Sasquatch related to UFOs or vice versa. You know what I mean? But I think in Stan's case, it might be the more general sense, like there might be this bigger connection to all things paranormal,
Right, and that's a fascinating thing to explore as well. There's different regions. Now, we've got Skinwalker Ranch out here in Utah. There's a lot of weird reports that run the gamut, you could pretty much say. Similar to what you talked about, the dogmen, even Bigfoot sightings, Skinwalker-type creatures, and then the UFO report. So, yeah, that's kind of what I was asking that question. I'm just wondering if maybe that's kind of an area where it's just a paranormal hotspot in general. So
Yeah. And it kind of seems like it. I certainly wouldn't describe it as Skinwalker or, the Chestnut Ridge area or anything like that, but there's certainly some strange things going on, though.
In some of the cases where you've interviewed people, have they actually provided you with some actual physical evidence of their encounters, whether it be pictures or other types of evidence?
There have been some pictures, but again, it's a picture, and it's typically a light, or it might be a poor quality video. So I wouldn't necessarily say it's good or hard and fast evidence, but it's certainly at least a little something to add. More so what I get are drawings of what they saw. And, and that's fine, too. I like to put them all together because what I do with my writings, like the reason I'm sharing the stories is because, at least in the state of Maine, there's nobody cataloging all these sightings. I mean, MUFON is, in a sense. Peter Davenport is, in a sense, with New Fork, but not in the sense of an easily shareable and easy-to-digest manner. For MUFON and New Fork, it's all in a database, which is great. I'm not slighting that in any way. But I would like to share these stories as like a historical record, like to preserve them. And it could eventually turn into folklore someday,
Right.
200 years from now or something like that. But, I just want to make sure that these stories are being collected and being told, and they have their place in the history books. As insignificant as it might be, there are some people that find it important. There are some people that don't even realize they find it important. They're just going about their day. But when I approach somebody, maybe I'm in a town doing an investigation, and I go to the gas station to get some coffee, and I might just ask the cashier, like, hey, have you ever seen a UFO or something? Or have you ever experienced something strange? And they might be like, well, geez, this happened when I was young. And everybody loves to tell the story, or everyone loves to hear a paranormal story, so there is an audience for it, if you will, but sometimes people don't know they're an audience for it, so at the very least, if I can put these stories together and I can write them in a way that's somewhat compelling, because I'm not Shakespeare over here.
Right.
I'm just a regular dude. I write how I talk. And so if it can be somewhat entertaining, because I want to hold somebody's interest, then I think that's important, because these stories are being told, and somebody may have had an encounter, and they're scared of it, or they're embarrassed by it. At the very least, without anybody else knowing except for them, they read my book, or they read one of these stories in my book from somebody else, then maybe they don't feel so alone. And that's pretty powerful too,
Right. And I'd like to also talk about the abduction research that you've done, and I'm just curious for the abduction cases. Can you talk? Well, just first of all, can you talk about some of the most significant, just maybe a few of the real significant cases that you've researched? And is this? I believe the Betty Barney Hill case was close to your neck of the woods. I believe that was New Hampshire. So
right.
Close to where you're at. But if you can talk, do you have a couple that were really significant that you feel are pretty interesting to talk about?
Yeah, sure. There's one case in particular. I call it the Laura Dent case. And this case actually pissed me off at first, and I'll tell you why. The first time I heard about it was when I was watching an episode of Hangar 1. And if you remember that MUFON show they had for a bit on History Channel.
Right.
Anyway, yeah. So anyways, I was pissed because I had not heard about the encounter before this television show, and I was mad at myself for not finding this story in my research,
Right.
But anyways, I got over it, and I really wanted to know everything I could about the case. So I contacted MUFON, and this was a couple of years ago now, and I got in touch with Valerie Schultz. At the time, Valerie Schultz was the assistant state director of Maine for MUFON. She has since been promoted to state director for Maine and New Hampshire, actually. But anyways, she's a lovely woman, and we've certainly befriended each other. We've actually held a couple of MUFON meetings where I showed up to, tell some stories and help out a bit. And it turns out, though, that she was the investigator assigned to this Laura Dent case. And we talked quite a bit at length about it, and the witness preferred not to talk to me directly. So kind of frustrating on my side, but I really wanted to get the story, though. So I obviously interviewed Valerie about it. And this story started back in the early 80s, and she was about 8 years old. And it began with their farmhouse being engulfed in light at night. That's what she would observe. She'd be sleeping in her bed, and bright lights would come through her window, and she could see that the field that her father owned, it was a wheat or a crop field in front of their house, was being all lit by light. So it happened so frequent, she could never find a source, that she wanted to talk to her parents about it. But her parents, kind of like my dad when I was 4 or 5 years old, they dismissed her. Not intentfully, not hurtfully, but just like, you're seeing things, like, don't worry about it,
Right.
But one day, though, she found a crop circle in her father's field, and she showed it to him, and she described him as being distressed about it, and he immediately mowed the area. And then the next day, she said she was home all alone. Her parents had gone to town just to get some supplies, only going to be gone half hour, 45 minutes. And when they left, 10, 20 minutes after they left, a black sedan drove up her dirt road, parked. She hid so she wouldn't be seen, and she said she saw these two men dressed in black suits, and they got out of the car, and they walked to the area of the field where the crop circle had been. But this surprised her because her father had mowed it, and it looked like the rest of a mowed field, so she wasn't sure how they knew exactly where to go. But they ended up taking soil and grass samples, and she said that they placed them into small jars, and then they just left quietly. They didn't try to approach the house or anything. They just took the samples and left. So a few nights later, the lights came on again, like she saw the lights over the field, and she said that she grabbed some binoculars to try to get a better look. She said that the light dimmed, and she saw what she described as a silver disc-shaped craft with windows. She kept watching and also saw little figures moving around the field, and she claimed after watching it for a while, like she wasn't But she kept watching and realized that they were gray alien-looking beings. And she said that she was aware of what gray aliens look like by some, movies and some TV that she had previously watched. Now, according to Valerie, the witness then went on to explain that abductions started happening around this time. However, she doesn't have very good memories of it. The only thing that she says about the abductions is that as a child, they were kind of fun and happy in nature, but as an adult, she's still being abducted, and they're much more scary in nature. So that's really all she said about the abductions and that they're still happening. However, maybe she doesn't want to share more with me or more with Valerie and does remember more. But I included this abduction case because the way it started, I thought, was extremely detailed. And sometimes you don't get that in abduction cases. It becomes all about what happens on the craft and the aftermath. And I thought it was kind of cool to have a very detailed setting around the origins of it, So that's one I included because of that.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for that. And you also have come out with a documentary, Abducted New England, with a colleague of yours. Can you talk a little bit about that? I know you probably can't share too much, but kind of the work you did for that documentary.
Sure, absolutely. I wrote and produced that documentary, and it's available on vidi.space. VidiSpace is an online TV network that Nick Groff and Elizabeth Saint started. And Nick Groff, of course, from Ghost Adventures and Paranormal Lockdown. And it's being featured there, and it'll also be on DVD and Amazon Prime. But anyways, Bill Brock directed it, and what we did is I found 3 witnesses. One that I actually is a witness from the book, and then 2 other witnesses. One is ex-military, and the other one is a gentleman who lives actually up near me in Bangor, Maine. We have a sister city called Brewer, Maine, and a fellow researcher sent me his information, and I contacted him and interviewed him, and he's got a pretty great story as well. So once we had those 3 main witnesses, we also had a town hall meeting in New Hampshire, in Stratham, New Hampshire, which is the next town over from Exeter, New Hampshire, which of course had a pretty famous UFO encounter back in '65. So, but anyways, during the town hall meeting, we got a few other witnesses as well, and we put them all on camera. But as the documentary kind of shook out during the editing process, we ended up using those 3 main witnesses I spoke about already. And we had them tell their story. And we went to the places that, these encounters happened and got some video and all that good stuff. But it tells their stories in full. And in my opinion, it's pretty fascinating, the stories that they share.
Now, some of the research you've done on abduction cases, have some of them, or any of them for that matter, involved implantation devices, or where the witnesses said they think they may have been implanted with something?
Yeah. There's one that really kind of touched me quite a bit because of the witness. And it kind of goes back to before what I was saying about meeting a witness in person and reading their body language and seeing the look in their eyes and hearing the tone in their voice. There was this woman, her name is Sue, and I met her a couple of years ago, and she told me about some missing time that she had. And this was during a UFO encounter with her entire family. And this happened in, I think, 1991. And she was getting ready for bed, and her husband were actually going to watch a movie in bed. And her kids, who I think were like 14 or 16 at the time, were downstairs about ready to watch a movie as well. And this was about 9 p.m. And as she's getting ready for bed, putting on the nightgown and stuff, she saw this odd light out the window. She knew it wasn't the moon, so she was kind of staring at it and asked her husband, like, hey, the hell is that light? So he looks at it, and he's like, whoa, that's weird. And he said, why don't we go downstairs and look at it from outside? She's like, great idea. So they go downstairs, and the kids are like, what are you guys doing? And they're like, hey, there's this weird light outside. Why don't you come out with us? So all four of them parade outside, and to their far right, so they're on the porch, and they have to look to their far right, they see this light in the sky. And they're watching it just for a moment, and as they're watching it, it moves to completely in front of them, so that they're on the front porch, and now it's directly in front of them, and it descended a little bit more in the sky. And they described it as, you know, a round light, kind of looking like the moon, if you will. And they watched it for a while. Nobody really said anything, and after like 5 minutes, it just blinked out. So they were all just kind of like, wow, well, that was weird, you know, and they walked back in the house. And as soon as they walked in, the kids are like, what? The movie's over. And Sue was like, what are you talking about? The movie's not over. It's just starting. You know, it might be a little late, you know, because they were outside for like 5 minutes. Like, no, look at the screen. And the movie credits were rolling. And she's like, what? So she walked into the kitchen and looked at the time on the oven. And it was 11 p.m., a little after 11 p.m. And the entire family, it turns out, had 2 hours of missing time. Everyone, you know, understood this. Everyone was shocked, and no one really wanted to talk about it, you know. A little bit of time later, she started having these really weird dreams. And in her dream, it was just her and her husband, and they're on a spaceship, according to her in her dream. And everything inside the spaceship is white, except for some windows that they can see the stars through. And they go into this other room, and, well, they went into an elevator, and they go down to this other room, and it opens up, and it's filled with white clothes. And she says that half of everything was her size, and half of everything else was his size, her husband's size. And she also said that anytime her husband would open his mouth in these dreams, she had multiple, you know, it was a reoccurring dream. Anytime he'd open his mouth, a Pink Floyd song called Interstellar Overdrive would play. And she thought that was really odd.
Wow.
And after that, she had a reason to go to a doctor, and it turns out that she needed some x-rays, and her hip was x-rayed. And after the x-rays were done, the doctor discovered that there was something in her hip, and he described it as 3 metal spheres in the shape of a triangle. And when Sue went to go discuss her x-rays with the doctor, the first thing out of his mouth was, when were you abducted by aliens? Of course, he was kidding. But in her head, she was screaming like, oh my God. But her, you know, audible expression was to snicker a little bit, you know, to go along with the quote-unquote joke. But that really, really upset her, and it really bothered her. So she wrestled with whether or not she should maybe have them removed. The doctor couldn't figure out, you know, what the spheres were. Clearly, they weren't bothering her in any significant way. There was no scarring on her hip that would indicate anything was there, so that was very odd to the both of them. And then it turns out, so she ultimately decided to not have them removed. A couple of years later, she visited the doctor and needed some more x-rays done. And she pleaded with them. You know, it's a small town, small New England town, so everyone knows each other, and she pleaded with them to also x-ray her hip. Well, typically doctors don't do x-rays when they're unnecessary. But she claimed to have convinced them, and the spheres were gone when they examined the x-ray. So she asked him if she could compare it to the previous x-ray. And he said, sure. And when he went to get those x-rays, he claimed that they were either misplaced or lost. So that's kind of interesting, you know. It's a bit anecdotal, you know, but interesting nonetheless. But that's pretty much the story of Sue. She had another bout of missing time a few years later. But that was really the only time she remembers seeing a UFO when she was with her family, but she continued to have some missing time and some other anomalies occur in her life.
Wow, that's fascinating. Any of the other cases that you researched where there was other missing time, is that a common theme amongst the abduction cases you've researched?
Did you say any other cases with missing time?
Yeah, I mean, has that been a common theme in the abduction cases that you've researched, the missing
Actually,
time?
it really hasn't been a common theme. It certainly has popped up in a few stories, but I wouldn't say it's a running theme to all the stories. And maybe some people aren't keeping track, but for instance, there's a story about a gentleman who was kind of out drinking, and he was with his brother and stuff like that, and he had a bout of, I wouldn't say it was missing time, but he recalls this whole abduction scenario where he was on this craft, and the whole process was about 4 hours. So it happened at 2 a.m., and when he was, quote-unquote, released, it was 6 a.m., so not really necessarily missing time, but there was a time span that had passed, So, yeah, I wouldn't say a running theme, but I would say another, something that is a pattern or a theme are odd dreams. That seems to come up more than the missing time, and odd dreams after potential abductions had happened,
Right. And in your research as well, had any of them been given messages from the aliens, whether it's things about the future, that sort of thing? I know that's been in some abduction cases.
Yeah. There was one case, and this is a weird one, man. There was one case where a psychic was involved, and she's the one that had the encounters. And there was a pretty significant message, and I can tell that story if you want. It's complex to say the least, so I'll try to make it as concise as possible. But would you like me to share that one?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's up to you. I mean, if it's something you can share in a reasonable time, that's fine. It's up to you.
Oh, sure. I wouldn't say it would take any longer than any of the other stories I told.
Sure.
But again, I'll make it as concise as possible. And the full story is also in the book. I interviewed the psychic at length about it. But anyways, it all starts in 1968. But it starts with a guy named John Walker, and he was in the Navy. He joined in 1955. And in 1968, after having started a family and owning a restaurant, he began selling U.S. intelligence secrets to the Russians.
Yes, I do remember that name.
Because he needed money. Okay?
Yep, I remember this case.
This went on for over 15 years. Eventually, his wife was sick of his behavior, and she called the FBI on him. And they arrested him in 1985 for espionage. And this was a big story, and it was picked up all over the world. Books were written about it. It was big stuff. So anybody listening, they can Google John Walker Navy espionage, and you can read the full story of just like John Walker and all the stuff he did.
Yeah,
his wife.
That case of John Walker, real quick, he actually is considered to have done more damage to national security than just about any other spy.
Absolutely.
All the secrets that he sold.
And I go into a bit more detail than, the brief overview I just gave you in the book. But there's another book called, I Pledge Allegiance. I think that's the name of it. And fascinating book on the John Walker case. So if anybody wants to check that out. But his wife, her name is Barbara. And, she put up with his activities for a long time. And what finally made her call the police or the FBI was a psychic from Maine. And her name was, or is, Shalelle Way. She's currently a practicing psychic in Skowhegan, Maine. So in 1976, Barbara divorced John Walker, and turns out that Barbara was from Maine, and she moved back home after the divorce. And she befriended the Way family, W-A-Y, and spoke with Shalelle on a few occasions. And eventually, Barbara asked Shalelle for a reading. So Barbara explained her husband's situation, the espionage and all that stuff. And Shalelle recommended that Barbara turn in her husband. And Barbara credited Shalel for this decision. And newspapers all over the world also reported this and interviewed Shalel about the reading, and she quickly became, a bit of a celebrity psychic at the time. And the story went viral, if you will, for the time. So I began digging into Shalel and found that she had been interviewed by another author some time ago. And in his book, she claimed to have been made aware of her psychic powers by extraterrestrials. And this happened when she was a child. And she said she would speak to them once in a while, and they told her that she was needed for something big later on. So in 2016, I contacted Shalel, and she invited me to her home, and we talked about the John Walker case and about the extraterrestrials. And she's a lovely woman, a tad eccentric, but that never hurt anybody. And she openly discussed the Walker case, but really didn't tell me anything more than what had already been written about it, And so the subject went to the extraterrestrials, and she told me about some childhood encounters, and she shared those encounters with her family at the time, kind of like Lori Dent and kind of like me with my dad. And her parents actually listened, though, and it actually made them a bit worried. Like, they thought something might be wrong with her mentally. So they took her to her doctor to make sure she was okay. The doctor gave her a clean bill of health. So then her mother brought her to a priest. So I guess the mother wanted to make sure spiritually that her daughter was okay. So anyways, the priest found Shalel to be perfectly normal and told the mother this. And surprisingly, after that, Shalel's parents supported Shalel's abilities and believed her and the extraterrestrials, like all of it. So it's pretty cool. Now, Shalel told me an encounter with the extraterrestrials. There's a few of them, but I'll kind of cut to the chase here. In 2009, there was this really big story, kind of like her purpose of why the extraterrestrials said they needed her. And she said that they visited her in 2009 and that they wanted her to help the world. So she said that they would give her, not really vague, but messages that she kind of had to figure out. So she would meditate and she would use her tarot decks to help her find the answers. And she said she found something big. And she said that she figured out that the president of Iran wanted to nuke Israel and that he wanted to do this before their elections took place because he didn't think he would win and he wanted to put a lasting legacy out there. So after Shalel found out this information, she wasn't quite sure what to do with it, so she reached out to some friends. And one man that she identified as a, quote, Marine veteran wanted to help. So they got together and they devised a plan to thwart the president's nuclear attack. They decided that they would threaten the president's sons with military snipers. They wouldn't actually set this up, but they wanted the president to believe this. And if he did, the negotiation would be that the sons live if you don't drop a nuke. So how were they supposed to be able to get this threat to the president of Iran? Well, Shalel said that she has an Israeli friend from a wealthy family that had, quote, connections. She contacted him. He sided with Shalel, and he agreed to get word of this threat to the president. And then the waiting started. The elections came and went. Of course, there was no nuke that was set off, and Shalel is convinced that her involvement and the extraterrestrial messages that were sent her thwarted that nuclear attack.
Wow.
Again, I know it's a complex story, but that's what she told me when I sat down with her. And of course, I was jaw dropped, and I had never seen a more genuine telling of a story than what she told me.
Wow, that's incredible. That's amazing.
And the book, the story in the book, goes into much more detail. So if people want to check, the full story out, but that's pretty much the nuts and bolts of it.
Wow, that's a kind of story. You don't hear stories like that too often about messages. Some of them are a little bit more generalized, like humankind needs to learn to, love more. Those sorts of messages, and needs to stop polluting the planet. That sort of thing. That's pretty specific. Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. Yeah. Let's talk about a little bit more about some of your experiences, some of the UFO encounters you've had, Are there a few that really, I mean, obviously you already talked about the one when you were very young. Any others that, because sounds like you've had several. Are there a few that were really compelling and you're pretty certain what you witnessed was extraterrestrial?
I couldn't really say any of them were extraterrestrial. I would say two of them are on a scale of, I don't know what the hell they are, to the point where it's a little creepy, you know what I mean? And that, to me, says could be extraterrestrial, but there's no way I could just come out and say, yep, these are extraterrestrial. But regardless of that, I've had 11 sightings my entire life. Now, I think maybe when I was 4 or 5, that maybe taught me at a young age to look up as well, especially seeing that weird lightning bolt and then also seeing the northern lights. So, maybe that's why I'm seeing more, just because I look up. Even this day and age with cell phones and everything, I look up constantly.
Right.
But and I think across the 2 books that I've put out, I've spoken about the majority of the UFO encounters, but one that was fairly significant for me, that was, very high strangeness, was when my roommate, this was back in, 07 maybe, and I was living in the town of Freeport, Maine. That's the home of L.O. Bean for your non-Maine listeners. But I was living in Freeport, Maine, and it was probably 6 p.m. or so, and I was already home for the day from work, and my roommate came home, and they, ran up the stairs, super fast, came in and, slammed the door, and they were like, yo, there's a UFO outside, right now. And my roommate at the time was a huge skeptic, doesn't believe in this stuff.
Right.
Still doesn't, despite what they saw. But it was like, yo, you should go outside and see this. I don't know what it is. So I'm like, what? So I run outside, and I'm standing on my front porch, and hovering over the house across the street. So it's probably 150 yards away, the house across the street, that is. There's this thing hovering over their house. And I'd say it was probably 300 yards above the house. But, it's tough to gauge distance, but, that's my approximation anyway. And what I saw was 2 red lights, solid red lights, on either side, and then up a little bit in the center was a white light. They were completely solid, and it was simply hovering. There was no noise. It looked big. If I extended my arm out, it would take about my entire length of my thumb to cover the whole craft, or the whole thing, whatever it was. And I sat there watching it. I remembered that I had my cell phone in my pocket. Well, in 2007, cell phones weren't that great. I had a Nokia phone, one of those brick phones.
Sure.
And I pulled it out and took a picture, and the only thing that really came out was a red streak of light, on a black background, so that was kind of a bust. But anyways, I sat there and I stood there and I watched it for 5 minutes, and then it slowly and diagonally moved up, and then it sat there for another minute or two, and then slowly it started moving horizontally across the sky, parallel with Route 1 in Freeport, Maine, which is the main road going through the town. So I fumbled for my keys, and I'm like, I'm going to follow this and see what the hell this is. So just about a mile down the road from where I lived at the time, there was a field with an open view of the sky. So I was going to try to beat it there, because to me it looked like it was traveling pretty slow. But as soon as I got on the road, I immediately lost sight of the UFO. So again, I was pissed at myself. I'm like, dang it, I lost sight of it. But I drove really fast to that open field, parked on the side of the road, and I just waited, because I knew it was going to be there any second. Unobstructed view of the sky, it never showed up.
Oh, that's disappointing.
But I would say that was probably one of the weirdest things that I had seen. I just couldn't explain it. No sound. It seemed really close. It seemed big. And it was an odd time, meaning it wasn't, 2 o'clock in the morning. It was rush hour time. You know what I mean? So
right.
It was kind of weird that it was just hovering above this house across the street.
Now, of any of the cases that you've researched, were any of them mass sightings? Had more than one person? Did you talk to more than one witness about some of these sightings, or were a lot of them just mainly one person?
When you said mass sightings, the story that jumped to mind, which I did write about in the book, were some mass sightings that happened in Elliott, Maine, back in the 60s. It was mid to late 60s when this happened. I can't remember exactly if it's 67, 68. I don't have the book in front of me right now, but in Elliott, Maine, which is at the southern tip of Maine, just bordering New Hampshire, Betty Hill and some other investigators were being told stories of all these UFOs that could be seen, and it was a fleet of UFOs as well. So you had mass sightings with a fleet of UFOs. And almost nightly, Curry, it was reported that these UFOs would follow the river. And it got to be so common, or, you know, you could set your clock by it, that people in mass droves would go out there to watch the UFOs. It got so busy that the police had to come out and direct traffic, and even food carts were set up. It's crazy.
Wow.
And people would see these fleets of UFOs. I've never seen a picture, you know, reported about it or anything like that. Certainly cameras existed in 68, you know. So it can come across as a bit anecdotal, but where so many people saw them on so many occasions, and you had someone like Betty Hill putting this at the forefront, you know, after her encounter and all that stuff, it did gain some popularity in ufology at the time.
Right. So it sounds like you've done some work as a paranormal investigator as well. Can you talk a little bit about your experience with that?
Oh, yeah, sure. I used to paranormal investigate the wrong way. And when I say that, I mean like reports of hauntings, you know, homes and businesses being haunted. And when I say the wrong way, I mean, you know, I wasn't doing it as part of a group. I would go into areas that I probably wasn't supposed to. Maybe they even said no trespassing. And I went in anyways and tried to document what I could. I mean, all I had at the time was a digital camera and an audio recorder and a flashlight. And I would try to, you know, I would hear that a place was haunted, and I'd go there and try to check it out, you know.
Right.
But later on, I kind of smartened up and formed a group of some people that were also interested in it. And we ended up doing quite a few residential investigations, and we also did a couple of businesses, not too many, but a couple of them. And, you know, at that point, we had accumulated some more gear. You know, we had some EMF detectors, night vision cameras, and like a surveillance video system, some more decent audio recorders, things like that, you know. And conducted quite a few investigations, and we actually captured some fairly compelling evidence. Not a whole lot on camera. There was one thing we caught on camera was a cabinet door in a cabin opening by itself. But a skeptic would watch it and be like, oh, you pulled a string to have it open. You know, so you can't fight evidence like that, you know what I mean, or comments like that.
Sure.
Because they're right. A skeptic would look at it and be like, yeah, that's what it looks like. It wasn't the clearest view, you know what I mean? And but we also caught some really compelling EVPs as well. One included a child like laughing and giggling, and you can hear it yell out the word "mommy." It's like a class A plus EVP, and you can view those on my YouTube channel. And we did that for a few years, and then some personal events happened in a lot of the investigators' life. Like there was medical concerns, there was a baby being born, you know, things like that. So we kind of went on hiatus for a while, and then that just prolonged, and I was doing more and more extraterrestrial investigations, and to the point now where it's defunct. We're all on speaking terms, nothing's wrong, you know, it just kind of fizzled out. You know?
Right. Life just kind of happens. Sure, that's understandable. And you also do a podcast, I think it's called I Want to Believe. Are you still doing your your show?
Yeah, it's called I Want to Believe. I host it with my buddy Kyle Sawyer. And I don't know if the way I'm talking now is any indication. I'm kind of a dum-dum, and I like to have fun. We don't take ourselves seriously, but we take the subject matter seriously, if that makes sense. I hope it does.
Sure.
We like to be, lighthearted, but when we get down to the nitty-gritty of telling the story, we research it just like if I'm doing research for, one of my books. We research the encounter, because we typically, what we do is, we we dedicate a show to a certain encounter. For example, the Dover Demon we've covered, the Yahlov Pass, things like that. And we'll discuss the incident at length and then offer, our opinions, which is typically, man, I don't know what the hell happened. and then hopefully people have a good time with it. The episodes are typically a half hour or something like that. Some are a little bit longer. And what's a little bit different about it, though, is it's pre-recorded, and we record everything at once and then release it as a season, like Netflix style.
Okay.
So season 1 is out now, anywhere you get your podcast, so you can, binge listen if you want. Or you might hear one and be like, all right, this isn't for me, which is fine, whatever. And I'm actually, we're both in the stages of researching season 2, and we're going to start recording in October, and season 2 will be out in the winter of 2019, somewhere between January and March.
Wow, sounds like you're busy. Working on a lot of
things. I stay
things.
busy, man. Also, if you don't mind me mentioning, I'm actually working on a documentary right now that I'm writing and directing, and it's called Otherworldly Amor, A-M-O-R, Otherworldly Amor. And amor is Spanish for love. And this documentary is about a couple from southern Maine who are experiencing ongoing current extraterrestrial activity in and around their home. It's a fascinating story. And these two people, they're a newlywed couple. They married in February of this year. And they are just utterly in love, like soulmates type love. And this love of theirs is like helping them through these encounters. And I'm telling the story. It's really a love story with an extraterrestrial undertone, if you will. Right. And I currently have an Indiegogo campaign up to help finance the film. So, I'm sure Curry, that, doing this stuff everything is out of pocket.
Right.
And I'm not a rich man. I'm not a rich man.
Me neither.
And there are things that cost money for a documentary and things that you wouldn't think about, like closed captioning. That's something that is needed if you are to get it on a platform such as Amazon Prime or Netflix or something like that, and that costs money.
Right.
Also, I want to do some animation and some artist rendering, and I don't do everything, so I'd like to pay an artist to do that, composers to do a soundtrack, things like that. So it costs money. And if you go to Indiegogo.com, you can search Otherworldly Amor, A-M-O-R. You'll find my documentary. I've got some video clips from it on there. If you'd like to support it, there's some great perks, too. You can get a DVD. You can get some books and DVDs. You can get some vinyl records. There's a whole bunch of perks. So if anybody can help out, that would be awesome.
Great. Sounds like that's going to be a good one. And then I always like to ask this of any of the UFO researchers I have on the show because, I think it's a fascinating time for ufology. With the fact that we had the F-18 gun camera footage come out, and we've got Tom DeLonge and To the Stars Academy and their efforts. I think some maybe would say they're frustrated with what they would see as, very, very slow progress.
Yeah.
I'm just curious kind of what your take on all this is. Do you see this as something, or do you see this as encouraging? Where do you kind of sit with this?
Yeah, sure. So, specifically more about, To the Stars and stuff?
Right, and the efforts that they're doing, trying to, Louis Elizondo.
Sure. So, first of all, I think it's absolutely amazing to read in major newspapers or to watch on mainstream television anything that has to do with the UFO phenomenon. That's fascinating. And I think that's great. However, I am also leery. This may be the conspiracy theorist that hides in me, but I'm skeptical as well. Mainstream media has proven to have agendas to say to us, look here while something else happens over there, So just
right.
Like the witnesses I talk to, I do not believe everything that I hear, but I am open-minded. And for To the Stars specifically, I was very skeptical at first. What the hell is DeLonge doing? And, what the hell with this guy? But then things started coming together. After that first book, now Elizondo, the Pentagon stuff, the Tic Tac UFO, and these materials and all that stuff, I think it's interesting. And like you were saying, hopefully more will come out because it has been slow as molasses. So I guess I'll say that I'm still skeptical, but I am open to seeing and hearing what they have to say.
Right, and yeah, to me that was amazing too, because the mainstream media has ignored this for so many years, and for the most part, there's been bits and pieces of it that have come out.
You had the Larry King episodes and stuff like that, but it was because he was interested in ufology, you know what I mean?
Right.
But, after that New York Times article, which some of that was helped by this To the Star stuff and Elizondo and everything, it's pretty amazing that there are some people that are taking notice, and not only that, but a government admission that, hey, Project Blue Book, even though we've said for the past, 40, 50 years that that's when we stopped looking at UFOs, they admitted at the very least from 07 to 12 that, okay, we did, a little bit more.
Right, we looked into it just a little bit more.
Olden terms with aerial threats, things like that, but it's interesting to say the least,
Yeah, and I was hoping by now we might see something new coming out. Supposedly there's some more video coming out here soon.
Yeah. And I want to say they even promised more video, and it's not here yet,
Yeah, and from the interviews I've heard Louis Elizondo on, he does seem to be a pretty straightforward guy, a straight shooter.
Agreed. Yeah.
I think that's encouraging. I have heard other people say they are very cautiously optimistic. He does seem to have some heavy hitters, Chris Mellon and a few other former CIA guys, but some have said, hey, they've done this kind of work. Robert Bigelow's involved, and he's been involved in other ventures in the past, and not a lot's come of it. So I'm hoping, and I'd say, I guess from my perspective, I'm kind of cautiously optimistic, but I'm really hoping we would see more by now. And just any other. So I know you mentioned you're working on the documentary. Any other books? Are you still doing a lot of UFO research and planning on putting out any more books on the subject?
Yeah, man. Yeah, I have for UFO or extraterrestrial specifically. I think I've got another 2 books worth of stories that I can tell, and so I have all those stories collected. I have all the witness names. Some of them have been contacted and are willing to talk. Some of them have been contacted and don't want to talk, and some of them I just haven't gotten to yet because of the other things I'm doing. I also have quite a bit of material where this is just another interest of mine, and I would say extraterrestrial UFO is a passion, obviously, but all things paranormal are a passion as well. So I've also started work or putting together stories, writing stories about odd creatures, typically within an extraterrestrial setting, meaning kind of like the Stan Gordon stuff, where I have some Sasquatch stories where UFOs were seen. I actually found out some information about the Dover Demon that finally has a UFO connection, which is really cool. That's never been a thing, and I always have thought that the Dover Demon looks like a gray alien,
Right.
So finally there's a family that reported they saw a UFO on the night in question, which is really cool, and hasn't been put into print before a couple of years ago where I saw this book. So, you're talking 35 plus years, and then finally a little bit came out. Anyway, so odd creatures that maybe have an extraterrestrial tinge to it. I'm also working on something like that. Who knows if it will manifest into enough stories to collect into a book. A lot of publishers have a 50,000 or 65,000 word minimum. And so that's quite a bit of stories to have to reach that minimum. So hopefully I will, and if so, I'll send it to somebody, and maybe they'll be dumb enough to put it out too. So that's cool.
Well, you seem to have done okay with your book so far. So, hey, thanks for hanging out with me, Nomar. I really appreciate you coming on and talking with me. And I'll look out for those documentaries. I'm looking forward to the Abducted New England one. I'll look out for that on Prime, and the new one.
Yeah, man. And you know what? And I don't know if you want to cut this out or whatever. I don't care. But I'll send you a media screener of the Abducted documentary so you can check it out.
Great. Yeah, I appreciate that. And once again, thank you for hanging out with me. And I look forward to some of your work down the road here, and maybe we can have you back and talk again someday.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a good time, Curry. I appreciate it, and Anytime you want to have me on, I'm down. Also, if anybody wants to send me a story, I don't care where you're from. You don't have to be from Maine or New England. You can hit me up on Facebook.com/Nomar Slevik author. Just send me a message. You can tell me I'm an idiot or share a story, whatever you want to do. If you call me an idiot, I probably won't respond back.
No, I don't think I would respond to that either. All right, Nomar, hey, appreciate it, and you have a great night.
You too, man. Take care.
All right. Okay, wow, what a fascinating discussion that was with Nomar. He's done a lot of research on UFO and abduction cases in the state of Maine. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. I really do enjoy having some of these discussions with great researchers and authors and getting their insights and thoughts, and it was great to hear his thoughts on all the research he's done on these cases. And again, if you want to pick up the book, his latest book is Otherworldly Encounters, Evidence of UFO Sightings and Abductions. And again, that's on Amazon, as well as his previous book, UFOs over Maine. And so you can check those out there. You can also go to his Facebook page at facebook.com, Nomar Slevik author, and he's got a lot of information about not only his books, but also the documentaries that he mentioned. So there's some great information on there. And again, I really hope you enjoyed tonight's show. Join me for next show, and I'll have Gary Vassie on the show, and he's going to be talking about his book and research on the subject of black-eyed kids. Man, that's a terrifying subject. I got to tell you, I've been reading the book, and if there's anything that so far has had a big creep factor for me, that is one of them. So it's going to be interesting to have that discussion with Gary. And if you ever heard about or read anything about the black-eyed children or black-eyed people, it's a pretty frightening subject. So that will be an interesting one. And again, thank you for tuning in, and we'll look forward to the next show. Thank you.